She was serving coffee on a 3 a.m. flight when she saw that the billionaire passenger was her husband who had died 7 years ago. Victoria Hayes had learned to love the hum of airplane engines at night. There was something peaceful about it, the way it drowned out everything else, the way it made the world feel smaller, manageable. For 7 years, she'd worked these red-eye flights, serving coffee and smiles to bleary-eyed passengers who barely looked at her. It was honest work, hard work, the kind that paid the bills and kept her daughter Emily fed, clothed, and safe. Tonight's flight was supposed to be like any other. Miami-bound, half-empty, scheduled to land at 6 a.m., the December air outside was bitter cold, but inside the cabin, it was warm and dim. Most passengers were already asleep, their heads tilted at awkward angles, mouths slightly open. Victoria pushed her service cart down the narrow aisle of the first-class cabin, the wheels squeaking softly against the floor. She'd done this 1,000 times, maybe more. Coffee, water, she asked a businessman in seat 2A, her voice practiced and pleasant. He shook his head without looking up from his laptop. Victoria moved on. The next passenger was in 3C, window seat, pulled shade, wearing expensive-looking sunglasses even though it was 3 a.m. Cartier, if she had to guess. His beard was perfectly trimmed, his suit was Armani, and his Patek Philippe watch caught the overhead light as he adjusted his seatbelt. Rich guy. Miami was full of them. Coffee, espresso, Victoria offered, already reaching for a cup. Espresso, black, he said. Without looking at her, his voice hit her like a punch to the chest. Victoria froze. Her hand hovered over the espresso machine. That voice. She knew that voice. Deep, slightly gravelly, with a hint of impatience that used to drive her crazy when they were running late for dinner reservations. No, it couldn't be. She forced herself to breathe, forced herself to turn back toward him. Her eyes traveled from the expensive watch to his hands, and that's when she saw it. The scar, a thin white line across the back of his right hand. She remembered the day he got it, 15 years ago, trying to fix his childhood bike in her parents' garage. He'd slipped with the wrench and gashed himself pretty badly. She'd driven him to urgent care, held his other hand while they stitched him up. Victoria's vision blurred. The cabin tilted. "Miss," the man said, irritation creeping into his voice. "The espresso." She looked at his face then. Really looked. The sunglasses hid his eyes, but she could see the rest. The sharp jawline, the shape of his nose, the way his left eyebrow twitched slightly when he was annoyed. That twitch. God. She'd teased him about it 100 times. And there, near his temples, barely visible beneath perfectly styled hair, faint scars, the kind you got from surgery, plastic surgery, maybe. Richard Coleman, her dead husband. The espresso cup slipped from her fingers. It shattered on the floor, ceramic shards scattering everywhere, hot liquid splashing across her shoes and his expensive leather Oxfords. Jesus Christ, he snapped, jerking his feet back. Are you kidding me? Victoria couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. It was him. She'd know him anywhere. 7 years? 7 years of grieving, of crying herself to sleep, of telling their daughter stories about the father she'd never meet. 7 years of believing he was dead, buried, gone. But he wasn't dead. He was sitting in seat 3C, wearing sunglasses at 3 a.m, complaining about coffee on his $1,000 shoes. "I'm so sorry, sir." Claire Morrison appeared out of nowhere, Victoria's fellow flight attendant and closest friend. "Are you okay, Vic?" Victoria's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Claire grabbed her arm, steadying her. "You look like you've seen a ghost. Come on, let's get you to the back." A ghost? Yes, that's exactly what this was. Claire led her away while another attendant rushed over with towels and apologies. Victoria let herself be pulled down the aisle, her legs shaking so badly she could barely walk. Behind them, she heard the man. Richard? It was Richard, grumbling about incompetent staff. In the tiny galley at the back of the plane, Victoria collapsed onto a jump seat. Her hands were trembling. Her whole body was trembling. "Vic, what's wrong?" Claire knelt in front of her, concerned. "Do you need water? Are you sick?" "I need..." Victoria couldn't finish. What did she need? A doctor? A priest? A psychiatrist? She needed to not be losing her mind at 35,000 feet. "Stay here," Claire said firmly. "I'll cover your section. Just breathe, okay?" Victoria nodded numbly. For the next 2 hours, she sat in that galley, hidden behind the curtain that separated first class from economy, but she couldn't stop watching him. Every few minutes, she'd peek through the gap in the curtain, studying him like some kind of stalker. He was on his phone constantly, speaking in rapid English about investments, about accounts in the Cayman Islands, about moving money. The Richard she'd known could barely balance a checkbook. This man spoke like he'd graduated from Harvard Business School. He ordered another espresso, complained when it took too long, sent an email on his laptop. She caught a glimpse of the name at the top. Marcus Ashford. Marcus Ashford, not Richard Coleman. When he stood to use the bathroom, Victoria noticed how he moved. Confident. Almost arrogant. The Richard she'd married had been confident too. But this was different. This was the walk of someone who owned the world and knew it, by the time the pilot announced their descent into Miami. Victoria had thrown up twice in the tiny bathroom, and hyperventilated so badly that Claire threatened to call the paramedics. "I'm fine," Victoria lied. "Just a panic attack. I get them sometimes." It wasn't entirely untrue. She'd had plenty of panic attacks over the years, but none like this. The plane landed. Passengers shuffled off. Victoria stayed hidden in the back until she was sure he was gone. Then, against every rule in the book and every ounce of common sense she possessed, she grabbed her bag and followed him. She spotted him at baggage claim. No luggage, just a leather briefcase and that same arrogant stride. She kept her distance, ducking behind pillars and other travelers, her heart hammering in her chest. Outside, a black limousine waited. Not just any limo. A Mercedes S-Class with diplomatic plates and windows so dark they were probably bulletproof. A driver in a crisp uniform opened the door for him. Victoria watched from behind a concrete column as he climbed inside. The door closed. The limo pulled away, and just like that, the ghost disappeared. Victoria stood there for a long time, shaking in the humid Florida morning. Around her, life went on. Taxis honked. Travelers dragged suitcases. Families reunited with tears and hugs. But Victoria couldn't move, because 7 years ago, she'd buried her husband. She'd worn black to his funeral. She'd held their newborn daughter at the graveside and promised to keep his memory alive. She'd spent 7 years building a life on the foundation of his death, working herself to exhaustion, raising Emily alone, telling herself that she was strong enough to survive this. But what if it had all been a lie? What if Richard Coleman wasn't dead at all? Victoria pulled out her phone. Her hands were still shaking so badly it took 3 tries to unlock it. She scrolled through her contacts until she found her mother's number. "Mom," she said when Margaret answered, her voice cracking. "I need you to watch Emily for a couple weeks." "I know it's a lot to ask, but..." "Of course, honey," Margaret interrupted. "Is everything okay?" No, nothing was okay. Nothing would ever be okay again. "I just need some time," Victoria said carefully. "I'll explain later." After she hung up, Victoria stood there in the Miami morning heat, watching cars come and go. She thought about Emily, safe at home with her grandmother. She thought about the tiny apartment in Queens that she'd worked so hard to afford. She thought about the life she'd built from the ashes of tragedy. And then she thought about the man in seat 3C, with his Cartier sunglasses and his diplomatic plates and his goddamn scar on his right hand. Victoria had spent 7 years mourning, 7 years grieving, 7 years believing she'd lost everything that mattered. But maybe, just maybe, she'd been grieving a lie. And if that was true, then she was going to find out, no matter what it cost, no matter what it took, no matter how many lies she had to dig through, because Victoria Hayes wasn't just a widow anymore. She was a woman with questions, and she was going to get her answers, even if those answers destroyed the fragile peace she'd spent 7 years building. Victoria called in sick for the first time in 3 years. "Medical leave," she told her supervisor, her voice flat. 2 weeks, maybe more. She didn't wait for approval. She just hung up and stared at her phone, at the photo of Emily on her lock screen. Gap-toothed smile, messy pigtails, holding up a drawing of an airplane. "That's Mommy," she'd said proudly when she made it. Victoria's chest tightened. What was she about to do? What kind of Pandora's box was she opening? But she couldn't stop. Not now. The next morning, she dropped Emily off at her mother's house in Brooklyn. Margaret Hayes lived in the same small row house where Victoria had grown up, with its creaky stairs and the kitchen that always smelled like coffee and cinnamon. 2 weeks? Margaret asked, frowning as Emily ran upstairs to the guest room that had been hers since she was born. Honey, what's going on? I just need some time. Mom? Victoria avoided her eyes. I'm exhausted. I need to rest. You've been exhausted for 7 years, Margaret said quietly. This is something else. Victoria hugged her mother tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of her lavender hand cream. I promise I'll explain, just not yet. Margaret didn't push. She never did. That was the thing about loss. It taught you when to ask questions and when to just hold on. Claire had given Victoria a name. Daniel Carter, ex-NYPD, ex-FBI, now a private investigator working out of a cramped office in Queens. He's good, Claire had said, discreet, and he doesn't judge. Victoria found the address on a side street near the courthouse, a building that had seen better decades, with a flickering neon sign that read, Carter Investigations, in faded red letters. She climbed 3 flights of stairs that smelled like cigarettes and old carpet. The office door was half open. Mr. Carter, she called, knocking anyway. Come in. The office was small and cluttered. Filing cabinets along one wall, a desk buried under papers, a coffee maker that looked like it belonged in a museum. Daniel Carter sat behind the desk, mid-40s, salt and pepper hair, tired eyes that had seen too much. He looked up from his laptop and gestured to the chair across from him. You must be Victoria Hayes. She sat down, clutching her purse. Claire told you I was coming. She did. He closed the laptop. Said you saw a ghost on a plane. That about right. Victoria's throat went dry. When he said it like that, it sounded insane. I saw my husband, my dead husband, on a flight to Miami 3 days ago. Daniel didn't laugh, didn't even smile. He just leaned back in his chair and studied her. You sure it was him? I was married to him for 5 years, Mr. Carter. I know what my husband looks like. People have doppelgangers. Twins they don't know about. He had a scar on his right hand, Victoria said, her voice steady now. From when he cut himself fixing a bike 15 years ago. He had a twitch in his left eyebrow when he was annoyed. I saw both. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he pulled a notepad from the mess on his desk. Tell me about the accident. So she did. She told him about December 2016, Richard's business trip to Boston, the phone call from the police at 2 a.m, the burnt-out Mercedes on a deserted highway. She told him about the funeral, about being 8 months pregnant and feeling like the world was ending, about going into labor 2 days later, about holding Emily for the first time and sobbing because Richard would never meet her. Daniel listened without interrupting, taking notes. The body was burned pretty badly, Victoria continued. They identified him through dental records and some personal effects. His wallet, his wedding ring. The medical examiner said there was no doubt. And you never questioned it. Why would I? Victoria's voice cracked. He was gone. They showed me evidence. I buried him. Daniel tapped his pen against the notepad. You got a photo of the guy on the plane. Victoria pulled out her phone with shaking hands. She'd managed to take one picture. Blurry, shot from behind a curtain, but clear enough. The man in 3C, sunglasses on, talking on his phone. Daniel studied it for a long moment. You know how crazy this sounds, right? I know exactly how crazy it sounds. Victoria leaned forward. But I also know what I saw. I need to know if I'm losing my mind or if my husband faked his death and left me to raise our daughter alone. Something shifted in Daniel's expression. He set the photo down carefully. My wife died 4 years ago. Cancer. And for months after, I swore I saw her everywhere. Grocery stores, subway platforms, walking down the street. Grief does things to your brain, Mrs. Hayes. Makes you see what you need to see. This isn't grief, Victoria said firmly. This is real. Daniel studied her for another long moment. Then he sighed. Okay, let's say it's real. Let's say your husband somehow faked his death. You understand what you're asking me to investigate here? We're talking fraud, identity theft, possibly murder if someone else died in that car. This isn't some guy who ran off with his secretary. I understand. And my fee isn't cheap, something like this. I'd need at least 2 weeks, maybe more. I'm talking surveillance, database searches. Interviews, we're looking at 50 grand minimum. Victoria opened her purse and pulled out a checkbook. The account had $50,000 in it. Every penny she'd saved over 7 years. Money for Emily's college fund. Money for emergencies. Money for a future that suddenly felt like it was built on quicksand. She wrote the check without hesitation and slid it across the desk. Daniel looked at it, then at her. This is your kid's college money, isn't it? Yes. You sure about this? Mr. Carter, Victoria said quietly. I've spent 7 years telling my daughter that her father died a hero, that he loved us, that he would have given anything to stay, if that's a lie, if he chose to leave us. Then I need to know. My daughter deserves the truth, and I deserve to stop mourning a ghost. Daniel took the check. All right, give me 2 weeks. I'll dig into everything. The accident report, the medical examiner's records, his financials. If there's something to find, I'll find it. Victoria felt something inside her shift. Relief, maybe, or terror. Thank you. That night, Victoria lay in her empty apartment and stared at the ceiling. Emily's room was silent down the hall. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a siren wailed. She thought about Richard, the man she'd married, the man she'd loved. He'd been charming, ambitious, always talking about making it big. But there'd been other things too. Things she'd ignored or explained away. The late nights at work. The business trips that seemed to come out of nowhere. The way he'd get defensive when she asked about money. Had she been blind? Or just naive? Victoria rolled onto her side and looked at the framed photo on her nightstand. Their wedding day. Both of them laughing. Her in white, him in a tux that was a size too big. He'd looked at her like she was the only person in the world. Had any of it been real? Her phone buzzed. A text from Margaret. Emily's asleep. She asked about you. I told her you're resting. Call me when you can talk. Victoria typed back. Tomorrow, I promise. Then she deleted the text thread and opened her photos, scrolling until she found the blurry picture from the plane. She zoomed in on his face, on those sunglasses, on that perfectly trimmed beard. Who are you? She whispered to the screen. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Daniel. Already found something interesting. Call me in the morning. Victoria's heart stopped. It had been less than 12 hours. She stared at the message for a long time. Part of her wanted to throw the phone across the room. Wanted to pretend she'd never seen that man on the plane. Wanted to go back to her simple, painful, manageable life. But she couldn't. Not anymore. Because somewhere out there, Richard Coleman was alive. And Victoria was going to find out why he'd let her believe he was dead. Victoria arrived at Daniel's office at 8 a.m. Sharp. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Richard's face. Or Marcus Ashford's face, or whoever the hell he was now. Daniel was already at his desk, surrounded by even more papers than before. He looked up when she walked in, his expression grim. Coffee, he offered, gesturing to the ancient coffee maker. Just tell me what you found. Daniel motioned for her to sit. He pulled out a manila folder thick with documents and slid it across the desk. Your husband wasn't just some guy who got cold feet, Mrs. Hayes. He was a professional thief. Victoria's hands trembled as she opened the folder. Bank statements, wire transfers, corporate documents. The numbers swam before her eyes. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, moving between accounts she'd never heard of. Richard worked as director of finance at Coleman Construction Group, Daniel began. Big company, government contracts, private developments, the whole 9 yards. And for 3 years he systematically robbed them blind. 3 years. Victoria whispered. Started small, a few thousand here and there, buried in expense reports and contractor payments. Nothing that would trigger red flags. But over time, it added up. Daniel pulled out a spreadsheet covered in highlighted numbers. $47 million. That's what he stole, maybe more. The room tilted. Victoria gripped the edge of the desk. $47 million. He was smart about it. Set up shell companies, offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, routed the money through so many channels it'd take forensic accountants years to trace it all. Daniel tapped another document. But here's the kicker. In November 2016, Coleman Construction scheduled an internal audit. They were tightening up procedures after losing a major contract. The audit was set for January 2017. But Richard died in December, Victoria said slowly. Exactly. 1 month before anyone would have discovered what he'd done. Daniel leaned back in his chair. That's not a coincidence, Mrs. Hayes. That's planning. Victoria felt sick. She'd known Richard was ambitious, that he wanted more than their modest suburban life. But this, how do you know all this? I still have contacts at the bureau, pulled some favors, called in some debts. Coleman Construction Group did file a complaint back in 2017, but once Richard was dead, the investigation stalled. Insurance paid out most of the losses, case went cold. Daniel paused. But the money never came back. It's still out there somewhere. In the Cayman Islands, Victoria said numbly. Most likely, which brings us to the other thing I found. Daniel pulled out another document. A passport application, photocopied and slightly blurry. The photo showed a man with a beard and glasses. Older, refined, but unmistakably Richard. Marcus Ashford, Victoria read aloud. British citizen, entrepreneur, fake identity, but a damn good one. Passport was issued in 2017, right after your husband's death. This guy has bank accounts, property records in Grand Cayman, even a business registration. He's not hiding exactly. He's just living under a different name. Victoria stared at the passport photo. How did he do it? The accident, the body. They identified him. I saw the death certificate. That's what I'm working on now, Daniel said. The medical examiner who signed off on the identification was Dr. Thomas Blake. I've been digging into his financials. And guess what? In January 2017, right after your husband's funeral, Doctor, Blake deposited $500,000 into an offshore account. He was paid, Victoria whispered. Looks that way, but there's more to it than just falsifying paperwork. Someone died in that car, Mrs. Hayes. There was a body, burned beyond recognition, but real. Daniel's voice softened. I'm looking into missing persons reports from that time period. People who disappeared around the same date as the accident. Homeless individuals. People no one would miss. Victoria's stomach lurched. She ran to the small bathroom in the corner of the office and vomited. When she came back, wiping her mouth with shaking hands, Daniel had a glass of water waiting for her. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I know this is a lot. He killed someone. Victoria's voice was hollow. Richard killed someone so he could disappear. We don't know that for sure yet, but yeah, that's the theory I'm working with. Victoria sat down heavily. For 7 years, she'd mourned a good man who died tragically. She told Emily bedtime stories about her brave father who worked so hard to give them a better life. She'd worn black to his funeral and cried until she had nothing left. But it was all a lie. Richard wasn't dead. He was living in the Caribbean, spending stolen millions, while she worked double shifts and stretched every dollar to make rent. I want to see him, Victoria said suddenly. What? Marcus Ashford, or Richard Coleman, or whatever he calls himself. I want to see him again, face to face. Daniel shook his head. Bad idea if he sees you. He already saw me, on that plane. He didn't recognize me, or he did and didn't care. Victoria's voice grew stronger. I need to know why, Mr. Carter. I need to hear him say it. Why did he leave? Why did he let me think he was dead? Why did he abandon Emily before she was even born? Mrs. Hayes, Victoria, she interrupted. And I'm not asking for permission. I'm asking for your help. Find him. Tell me where he is. I'll do the rest. Daniel studied her for a long moment. Then he sighed and pulled out his laptop. I tracked his movements after the Miami flight. He stayed at the Mandarin Oriental for 2 nights, then flew back to Grand Cayman. But he's got business dealings in the States. He'll be back. How do you know? Because men like him always come back. They can't help themselves. Daniel turned the laptop to show her a calendar of scheduled meetings. He's got a real estate deal closing in Miami next month. $50 million development project. He'll be there for at least a week. Victoria committed the dates to memory. What else do I need to know? He's dangerous, Daniel said bluntly. You don't steal $47 million and fake your own death unless you're willing to do whatever it takes to protect yourself. If he thinks you're a threat. I am a threat, Victoria said coldly. I'm the wife he left behind, the mother of his child. I'm the living proof that Marcus Ashford is a lie. That evening, Victoria drove to her mother's house to see Emily. She found her daughter in the backyard, drawing with sidewalk chalk, her tongue sticking out in concentration the way it always did when she focused. "Mommy!" Emily jumped up and ran to her, throwing her arms around Victoria's waist. Victoria held her tight, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. "Hey, baby, having fun with Grandma? She let me have ice cream before dinner," Emily whispered conspiratorially. "Did she now?" Victoria smiled despite everything. Margaret appeared on the back porch, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "You look terrible." "Thanks, Mom." "Emily, honey, why don't you go wash up for dinner?" Margaret said, once Emily was inside. Margaret crossed her arms. "Okay, talk. And don't tell me you're fine, because I've known you for 37 years, and I know when you're falling apart." Victoria tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Her throat closed up. Her eyes burned. "Honey," Margaret's voice softened. "What's wrong?" And then it all came pouring out. The flight, the man in seat 3C, the scar on his hand, Daniel's investigation, the stolen millions, the fake passport, everything. Margaret listened in stunned silence. When Victoria finally finished, her mother sank onto the porch steps. "That son of a bitch," Margaret said quietly. "That goddamn son of a bitch." They sat together as the sun set, Emily's laughter drifting through the screen door as she played inside. "What are you going to do?" Margaret finally asked. Victoria thought about Richard's smug face on that passport photo, about the years she'd wasted grieving him, about the lies she'd told Emily. "I'm going to find out the truth," she said. "All of it. And then I'm going to make sure he pays for what he did." Margaret reached over and squeezed her hand. "Then I'm with you. Whatever you need." Victoria squeezed back, grateful. For the first time in 7 years, she wasn't mourning anymore. She was angry. And anger, she was learning, was so much more powerful than grief. Dr. Thomas Blake lived in a modest colonial in Westchester, the kind of neighborhood where people mowed their lawns on Saturday mornings and waved to their neighbors. Daniel had been watching him for 5 days straight, cataloging his routines, morning coffee at the same diner, evening walks with his golden retriever, Tuesday night poker games. "He's nervous," Daniel told Victoria over the phone. "Jumpy. Keeps looking over his shoulder." "Good," Victoria said. She was sitting in her apartment, staring at the photo of Richard's death certificate that Daniel had sent her. Dr. Thomas Blake's signature was right there at the bottom, neat and official. Cause of death, blunt force trauma and thermal injuries. Identity confirmed. All lies. "I'm going to approach him tonight," Daniel continued. "He'll be alone. Wife's visiting her sister in Connecticut. I want to be there." "Victoria, he helped Richard do this," she said firmly. "He looked me in the eye at the funeral and told me how sorry he was for my loss. I want to see his face when you confront him." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "Okay, but you stay in the car. This could get ugly." They parked down the street from Blake's house just after sunset. The golden retriever was barking in the backyard. Lights glowed warm in the windows. Victoria watched Daniel walk up the driveway and ring the doorbell. Her heart hammered in her chest. Through the car window, she saw the door open. Blake appeared, late 50s, graying hair, reading glasses hanging from a chain around his neck. Daniel showed him something. A badge, maybe, though he wasn't FBI anymore. Blake's face went pale. He shook his head, tried to close the door, but Daniel said something that made him freeze. The conversation lasted less than a minute before Blake opened the door wider and let Daniel inside. Victoria waited. 10 minutes. 20. 30. Her phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. "Come in. Back door." She found the back gate unlocked. The golden retriever sniffed her curiously but didn't bark. Through the kitchen window, she could see Daniel and Blake sitting at the dining room table. When she stepped inside, Blake looked up, and the color drained from his face completely. "Oh my God," he whispered. "Victoria." "Hello, Dr. Blake." Her voice was ice. "Remember me, the widow whose husband you pronounced dead 7 years ago?" Blake stood up so fast his chair tipped over. "You need to leave, both of you. I don't know what you think you know, but..." "Sit down," Daniel said quietly. "I'm calling the police." "And tell them what?" Daniel leaned back in his chair. that were asking questions about a death certificate you falsified, about the $500,000 that appeared in your offshore account 1 week after Richard Coleman's funeral. Blake's hands were shaking. He looked at Victoria, then at Daniel, then back at Victoria. I didn't have a choice. Everyone has a choice, Victoria said. You don't understand. He would have killed me. He threatened. Blake's voice broke. He sank back into his chair, his head in his hands. God, I've lived with this for 7 years. Every day, I see that man's face. What man? Daniel asked. Blake looked up, his eyes red. The homeless man, Michael Johnson. That was his name. I looked him up after everything. Victoria felt the floor tilt beneath her. Richard killed him. Not directly. Not with his own hands. Blake took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. Richard came to me 6 months before the accident. Offered me money. So much money. If I would help him disappear, I said no. I'm a doctor, for Christ's sake. But he kept coming back, kept increasing the offer, and then what? Victoria's voice was sharp. Then he showed me photos of my daughter, Sarah. She was 19, at college in Boston. He had pictures of her going to class, having coffee with friends, walking home at night. Blake's voice cracked. He said accidents happen all the time to pretty young girls in big cities. He said I could either help him and keep my family safe, or say no and live with the consequences. The room was silent except for the kitchen clock ticking on the wall. So I helped him, Blake continued. He brought me the body in the middle of the night. It was already burned. He'd staged the whole accident. Found some poor homeless man, got him drunk, put him in the car with Richard's wallet and wedding ring, set it on fire on a back road where nobody would see. Victoria's stomach turned. And you just went along with it. He had dental records, Blake said. Fake ones. Good fakes. He'd planned everything down to the last detail. All I had to do was confirm the identity, sign the death certificate, and make sure nobody looked too closely at the body. His hands were shaking violently now. I told myself it was to protect Sarah, that I didn't have a choice. You always had a choice, Victoria said coldly. Blake looked at her with hollow eyes. I know, and I've paid for it every day since. I can't sleep, can't eat. My wife thinks I'm having a breakdown. She doesn't know. Nobody knows. He glanced at Daniel. What are you going to do? Turn me in? Daniel pulled out a small recording device from his jacket and set it on the table. The red light was blinking. Blake stared at it. You recorded this. Every word, Daniel said. And you're going to give me everything. The fake dental records, the paperwork, the communications with Richard, every piece of evidence you kept. Don't lie to me. Daniel's voice was steel. You're a smart man, Dr. Blake. You knew Richard might turn on you someday, so you kept insurance. Where is it? Blake hesitated, then stood up slowly and left the room. He came back 5 minutes later with a shoebox. Inside were USB drives, printed emails, handwritten notes, and, Victoria's breath caught, photographs. Photos of the body before it was officially discovered. Photos of Richard handing Blake an envelope. Photos that proved everything. He doesn't know I kept these, Blake said quietly. I was afraid he'd come back someday. Afraid he'd want to clean up loose ends. Good instinct, Daniel said, examining the contents. This is enough to reopen the case. Maybe enough to put him away for murder. And me. Blake's voice was small. That depends on how much you cooperate. Daniel looked at him. You testify, you might get immunity, you stay quiet, you go down with him. Blake nodded slowly. I'll testify. I'll tell them everything. I'm tired of running from this. Victoria stood up. She'd heard enough, seen enough. She walked to the back door, needing air, needing space, needing to be anywhere but in that room with the man who'd helped her husband fake his death. Daniel followed her outside. You okay? No. Victoria's voice was raw. Someone died, Daniel. An innocent man burned to death so Richard could steal millions and play house in the Caribbean. And I married him. I loved him. I had his child. You didn't know. I should have known. There had to be signs. Red flags I ignored because I was too stupid or too in love to... Stop. Daniel gripped her shoulders gently. This isn't your fault. Richard is a sociopath. He fooled everyone. His company, his family, the police, the medical examiner. You're not stupid for trusting your husband." Victoria's eyes burned with tears she refused to shed. "Emily's going to ask about him someday. Really ask. And I'm going to have to tell her that her father was a monster. Or you tell her that her father made terrible choices." But her mother was strong enough to find the truth and fight for justice. Daniel let go of her shoulders. "You get to decide what story she hears, Victoria, not Richard." They stood in the backyard, while the golden retriever nosed around the fence. Inside, Blake sat at his dining room table, staring at nothing. "What happens now?" Victoria asked. "Now I take this evidence to the Dawes office, build a case, find out when Richard's coming back to the States." Daniel paused. "And then we set a trap." Victoria looked up at the darkening sky. 7 years ago, she'd stood by a grave and said goodbye to the love of her life. She'd promised to honor his memory, to raise their daughter right, to be strong. But she'd been saying goodbye to a ghost, a fiction, a man who never really existed. The real Richard Coleman was still out there, living under another name, spending blood money, probably sleeping just fine at night. Victoria made a promise to herself then, not to Richard's memory, but to Emily, to Michael Johnson, to herself. She would make him face what he'd done, even if it destroyed her in the process. Victoria was folding laundry in her apartment when Daniel called. It had been 3 days since the meeting with Dr. Blake, and she'd thrown herself into mindless tasks. Cleaning, organizing, anything to keep her hands busy and her mind from spiraling. "I found something," Daniel said without preamble. "You need to come to the office." "What kind of something?" "The kind you need to see in person." 20 minutes later, Victoria sat across from Daniel's desk, watching him arrange photographs like he was laying out evidence at a crime scene, which she supposed he was. "I've been digging deeper into Richard's new life," Daniel began. "Marcus Ashford has a pretty extensive digital footprint if you know where to look. Property records, business registrations, even some social media presence through his company accounts." He slid the first photo across the desk. It showed a beautiful woman, late 30s, dark hair, elegant in the way that spoke of expensive salons and personal trainers. She was smiling at the camera, sunglasses pushed up on her head, wearing a white linen dress. "Who is she?" Victoria asked. "Sophia Laurent, French national, worked in the audit department at Coleman Construction Group from 2014 to 2016. Daniel paused. "She quit 2 weeks before Richard's accident." Victoria's stomach dropped. She knew, more than knew, she helped him. Daniel pulled out bank statements. Sophia was the one who set up most of the shell companies. She had access to the financial systems, knew exactly when the audit was scheduled, knew where the vulnerabilities were. She wasn't just an accomplice. She was his partner. The room felt too small suddenly, too hot. They were having an affair. "Yeah," Daniel's voice was gentle. "I found hotel records, restaurant receipts, weekend trips to the Hamptons. It started about 2 years before he died." "Before he died," he corrected. 2 years, Victoria thought back to 2014, trying to remember if there'd been signs. Richard coming home late, claiming work emergencies, business trips that seemed to multiply. The way he'd started going to the gym more, buying nicer clothes, getting his hair cut at that expensive barber shop in Manhattan. She'd thought he was trying to impress his bosses, trying to move up in the company. He'd been impressing someone. All right, just not his bosses. "There's more," Daniel said quietly. He slid another photo across the desk. It showed Sophia on a beach, turquoise water, white sand, the kind of paradise that appeared in travel magazines. She was laughing, wearing a red bikini, her hand resting protectively on her very pregnant belly. Victoria couldn't breathe. "This was taken in January 2017, Daniel said, about a month after Richard's funeral. "She was pregnant," Victoria whispered. "When he died, she was pregnant. 6 months along, based on the photo." Daniel pulled out another picture. This one showed Sophia holding a baby. Dark hair, chubby cheeks, wrapped in a blue blanket. Thomas Laurent Ashford, born March 2017, 6 years old now. Victoria stared at the photo. Emily's half-brother, a child Richard had actually chosen to know, to raise, to be present for. Daniel pulled out one more photograph, and this one was like a knife to the chest. It showed a family on a yacht, Sophia in a sundress, a young boy who had to be Thomas, and Richard, no beard this time, no sunglasses, just Richard, looking healthy and tan and happy, with his arm around Sophia's waist and his other hand on the boy's shoulder. They looked perfect, like something out of a catalog for luxury vacations. Like a real family. He left me for her, Victoria said numbly. Before I was even pregnant with Emily. He'd already decided. Looks that way. Daniel gathered the photos carefully, as if they might shatter. I'm sorry, Victoria. She stood up abruptly, nearly knocking over her chair. I need air. Victoria, I just need a minute. She made it to the hallway before her legs gave out. She sank against the wall, her head in her hands, trying to process what she'd just learned. Richard hadn't died in a tragic accident. He hadn't been stolen from her by fate or bad luck or wrong place, wrong time. He'd chosen to leave. He'd looked at their life together, their home, their marriage, their unborn baby, and decided it wasn't enough. She wasn't enough. And then, he'd found someone who was. Victoria thought about all the nights she'd cried herself to sleep, all the times she'd told Emily stories about her brave father, all the years she'd kept his memory alive like some kind of shrine. Meanwhile, Richard had been living in paradise with his real family, the family he'd actually wanted. Hey, Daniel appeared in the hallway with a bottle of water. Drink this. Victoria took it with shaking hands. I wasn't enough for him. This isn't about you, Daniel said firmly. This is about him being a selfish bastard who wanted money and excitement and didn't care who he hurt to get it. But why not just divorce me? Why fake his death? Why put me through 7 years of grief? Because a divorce would have meant splitting assets, alimony, child support, questions about where all his money was going. Daniel sat down on the floor next to her. Dead men don't have to explain themselves. Dead men don't have financial obligations. And dead men definitely don't get investigated for embezzlement. Victoria closed her eyes. I loved him. I really loved him. I know. And he loved her. She opened her eyes, looking at Daniel. He chose her. He chose their son. He looked at Emily, his own daughter, and decided she wasn't worth staying for. Emily is worth everything, Daniel said quietly. Richard's the one who's missing out, not her. Victoria knew he was right. Logically, she knew. But it didn't stop the pain. It didn't stop the humiliation of knowing she'd been the practice wife, the placeholder, the one who wasn't exciting enough, wasn't sophisticated enough, wasn't French and elegant and willing to help him commit crimes. There's something else, Daniel said. I also found evidence that Richard stole from your joint account, $200,000, the fund you'd saved for a down payment on a house. Victoria's head snapped up. What? He drained it about a month before the accident, made it look like a series of investment withdrawals. But the money went straight to the Cayman Islands. Daniel pulled out more papers. I'm sorry. I know this just keeps getting worse. Victoria stood up slowly. The grief was hardening into something else now. Something colder and sharper. Richard hadn't just left her. He'd robbed her, betrayed her, let her believe she was a widow while he played happy family with someone else. Let her work double shifts and struggle to pay rent while he spent her money on yachts and beach houses. When is he coming back to the States? Victoria asked, her voice steady now. Next week, Miami. He's closing that real estate deal I told you about. I want to see him, face to face. Daniel stood up. I'm not asking, Daniel. Victoria met his eyes. I'm telling you, I'm going to Miami. And I'm going to confront him. And you're going to help me do it in a way that gets everything on record. Victoria, if he realizes you know, what's he going to do, kill me? He already destroyed my life once. I'm not afraid of him anymore. She took a breath. I want him to see me. I want him to look me in the eye and explain why our daughter wasn't enough. Why I wasn't enough. And then I want to watch him get arrested. Daniel studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. Okay, but we do this my way. Carefully, with backup. The DA's office is already interested. Blake's testimony and the evidence sealed that they want Richard for fraud and conspiracy to commit murder. If you can get him to confess on tape, that's even better. I'll get him to confess, Victoria said. Men like Richard love to brag, love to prove how smart they are. All I have to do is give him an audience. They went back into the office. Daniel pulled up a calendar on his laptop. He arrives in Miami on the 15th, staying at the Mandarin Oriental. Same place as before. Victoria looked at the date. 1 week. 1 week to prepare for the confrontation that would either give her closure or destroy what was left of her sanity. "I need to tell my mother," she said. "And I need to see Emily before I go. Take your time. Get your head right. This is going to be hard." Victoria gathered her things. At the door, she paused and looked back at Daniel. "Thank you. For everything. Don't thank me yet. We haven't caught him." "We will," Victoria said, and for the first time in 7 years, she believed it. Victoria spent the week preparing, not just mentally, though God knows she needed that, but practically. Daniel had connected her with Jennifer Walsh, an assistant district attorney who'd been building a case against white-collar criminals for the past decade. "Your husband's not the first rich guy who thought he could disappear," Walsh said during their first meeting. She was sharp-eyed and no-nonsense, with graying hair pulled into a tight bun. But he might be the stupidest, coming back to the States. That's arrogance. They met in Walsh's office overlooking Lower Manhattan. Evidence boxes lined the walls. Blake's testimony, financial records, surveillance photos. Everything pointed to Richard Coleman, alive and well and very much guilty. "We need his confession on tape," Walsh continued. "Blake's testimony is strong, but a jury loves to hear it from the source. You think you can get him to talk?" Victoria nodded. "I know I can. It won't be easy, seeing him again, hearing whatever excuses he makes." "I don't care about easy," Victoria interrupted. "I care about making sure he pays for what he did." Walsh studied her for a moment, then smiled slightly. "Okay, here's how this works." The plan was simple. Victoria would wear a wire, a tiny microphone hidden in a necklace that Daniel had provided. She'd go to Richard's hotel suite, confront him, and get him talking. FBI agents would be stationed nearby, ready to move in once they had enough on tape. "Don't push too hard," Walsh warned. "Let him think he's in control. Men like Richard love to explain how clever they are. Give him that space." "And if he gets violent," Victoria asked, "then we come in immediately. But based on his profile, that's unlikely. He's a coward. Cowards don't get their hands dirty. They pay other people to do it." The night before Victoria left for Miami, she went to her mother's house. Emily was already asleep upstairs, but Victoria sat by her bedside anyway, watching her daughter's chest rise and fall in the dim glow of the nightlight. 7 years old, the same age Victoria had been when her own father left, though at least he'd had the decency to just walk out instead of faking his death. "You're going to be okay, baby," Victoria whispered, smoothing Emily's hair. "Whatever happens, you're going to be okay." Margaret found her there an hour later. "You should get some rest." "I can't sleep." Her mother sat on the edge of Emily's bed. "Are you sure about this, confronting him?" "I'm sure." "What if he—" Margaret's voice caught. "What if he hurts you?" "He already hurt me, Mom, the worst way possible." Victoria looked at her mother. "But he can't hurt me anymore, because I'm not that naive girl who believed in fairy tales. I'm a woman who knows exactly who she's dealing with." Margaret took her hand. "You're stronger than I ever was. I learned from the best." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to Emily's soft breathing. Finally, Margaret spoke again. "What are you going to tell her?" Eventually, Victoria had thought about this a lot over the past week. The truth, when she's old enough to understand, that her father made terrible choices, but that doesn't define who she is. That family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up. She squeezed her mother's hand. "Like you did. Like you've always done." Victoria flew to Miami on a Tuesday morning. Daniel was already there, coordinating with local FBI. They'd rented a surveillance van that would park across from the Mandarin Oriental, close enough to monitor but not so close as to be obvious. "Remember," Daniel said as he fitted the wire around her neck, disguising it as a delicate gold necklace. "Don't mention you know about Sophia or Thomas. Let him volunteer that information. The more he talks, the more he incriminates himself." Victoria's hands were surprisingly steady as she checked her reflection in the van's mirror. She'd dressed carefully. Not too formal, not too casual. A simple black dress, minimal makeup, hair pulled back. She wanted to look composed, strong. Nothing like the broken widow Richard had left behind. "You ready?" Walsh asked. She'd flown down too, not willing to miss this. I've been ready for 7 years. The Mandarin Oriental was exactly the kind of place Richard would love. All marble and gold accents, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Biscayne Bay. The kind of luxury that screamed money and power. Victoria gave the front desk her name. They were expecting her. Daniel had arranged everything, including making sure Richard knew she was coming. He'd sent an anonymous message. "Your past wants to talk. Suite 4012, 8 p.m. Cryptic enough to make Richard curious. Specific enough to make him show up. The elevator ride to the 40th floor felt endless. Victoria's heart hammered, but her breathing stayed even. In her ear, a tiny receiver allowed her to hear Daniel's voice. "We're here. You're not alone." She knocked on the door of Suite 4012. For a moment, nothing. Then footsteps. The door opened. Richard stood there, and for a second, Victoria forgot how to breathe. It really was him. Older, yes, more polished, but unmistakably her husband. His face went white. "Victoria." "Hello." "Richard." Her voice didn't shake. "Or should I call you Marcus? I can never keep track of your names." He recovered quickly. She'd give him that. His expression shifted from shock to something harder, calculating. "What are you doing here?" "Funny. I was going to ask you the same thing." She stepped forward. "You're supposed to be dead. I went to your funeral, cried over your casket, raised our daughter alone while you were... where? The Caribbean, living it up on stolen money." Richard glanced down the hallway, then grabbed her arm and pulled her inside. The door slammed shut. "You need to leave," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Now. Or what? You'll kill me like you killed Michael Johnson." Victoria yanked her arm free. "Yeah, I know about him. The homeless man you burned alive so you could disappear." "I know everything, Richard." His jaw tightened. "You don't know anything. I know you stole $47 million. I know you had Dr. Blake falsify your death certificate. I know about the offshore accounts, the fake passport, the shell companies." She stepped closer. "I know about Sophia." Something flickered in his eyes. Fear, maybe, or anger. "How?" He started, then stopped, shook his head. "It doesn't matter. You can't prove any of it." "Can't I?" Victoria pulled out her phone and showed him a photo. One of the surveillance pictures Daniel had taken. Richard, Sophia, and Thomas on their yacht, looking like the perfect family. Richard stared at the photo. "Where did you get that?" "Does it matter?" Victoria put the phone away. "You had another family, Richard. A whole other life. While I was working myself to death trying to keep a roof over Emily's head. You were playing daddy to another kid. Your real kid, right? The one you actually wanted. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like?" Victoria's voice rose. "Explain it to me. Make me understand how you could look at me, 8 months pregnant, and decide we weren't worth staying for. How you could let me think you were dead. How you could let your daughter grow up without a father when you were alive the whole time." Richard ran a hand through his hair. "You wouldn't understand. Try me." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, almost conversationally, he said, "You were always so small, Victoria. Small dreams, small ambitions. You wanted the house in the suburbs and the white picket fence and the boring, predictable life." His voice turned cold. "Sophia understood me. She wanted more. We wanted more. So you committed fraud, murder. You destroyed lives. I built a new life," Richard corrected. "One worth living. You think I wanted to spend the rest of my days playing middle-class husband to a flight attendant? Please." He laughed, bitter and ugly. "You were a placeholder, a practice wife, and honestly, marrying you was probably the biggest mistake I ever made. The words should have hurt, should have cut deep, but instead, Victoria felt something like relief, because this cold, cruel man, wasn't someone worth mourning, wasn't someone worth the 7 years of grief she'd given him. "You're right," she said quietly. "I am small. I work a normal job and live in a normal apartment, and raise my daughter to be a decent human being. And you know what? I'm proud of that, because at least I'm not a murderer. At least I don't steal and lie and destroy innocent people." Richard's expression hardened. "You need to leave, and you need to forget you ever saw me, because if you don't, What? You'll kill me too! Victoria stood her ground. Go ahead and try, because unlike Michael Johnson, people will notice if I disappear. My mother knows where I am, my friends know, and the FBI... She gestured to her necklace. They're listening to every word. The color drained from Richard's face. That's right, Victoria continued. Every confession you just made, recorded. They've got Blake's testimony, the financial records, everything. You're done, Richard. The door burst open. FBI agents flooded in, weapons drawn. Richard Coleman, you're under arrest. But Victoria was already walking out, leaving Richard to his fate. In her ear, she heard Daniel's voice. You did it. We got everything. She took the elevator down, walked through the lobby, stepped out into the warm Miami night, and for the first time in 7 years, she felt free. Victoria stood outside Suite 4012, her hand raised to knock through the door. She could hear movement, footsteps, the clink of glass. Richard was in there, probably pouring himself an expensive scotch, probably checking his phone for the 100th time, wondering who'd sent that cryptic message. In her ear, Daniel's voice crackled softly. Take your time, breathe, we're right here. She knocked. The footsteps stopped. Silence stretched for 5 seconds, then 10. Finally, the door swung open. Richard stood there in an untucked dress shirt and tailored slacks, a tumbler of amber liquid in his hand. When he saw her, the glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the marble floor. Victoria. His voice was barely a whisper. Hello, Richard. She kept her tone even, calm, like they were old acquaintances running into each other at a coffee shop. Or should I call you Marcus? I can never remember which name you're using these days. His face cycled through emotions. Shock, fear, confusion, and finally something harder, calculating. What are you doing here? Funny, I was going to ask you the same thing. Victoria glanced past him into the suite. Nice place. Must cost, what, $2,000 a night, 3. I guess stolen money spends just as well as honest money. Richard's jaw tightened. He looked down the hallway, checking for witnesses probably, then grabbed her wrist and yanked her inside. The door slammed shut behind them. Let go of me. Victoria pulled free, her heart racing but her voice steady. How did you find me? Richard demanded. Who told you I was here? Doesn't matter. She walked further into the suite, taking in the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay. The king-sized bed with its Egyptian cotton sheets, the bottle of Macallan on the bar cart. You're living well. Better than well. Must be nice, spending all that money you stole. I don't know what you're talking about. Really, we're going to play it that way. Victoria turned to face him. $47 million, Richard. That's what you embezzled from Coleman Construction. 3 years of theft, all leading up to your grand finale. Faking your own death and leaving the country. Richard's expression didn't change, but she saw his hand tremble slightly as he bent to pick up the broken glass. You're crazy. Grief does that sometimes. Makes people see things that aren't there. I saw you on a plane to Miami 3 weeks ago, Victoria said. Seat 3C, you ordered an espresso, complained when I dropped it. You didn't recognize me, or maybe you did and just didn't care. He straightened slowly, still holding a shard of glass. You're mistaken. Am I? Because I remember that scar on your right hand, the one you got fixing your bike when you were 12. You told me that story on our 3rd date. Victoria pointed at his hand. There it is. Same scar, same hand, same man who's supposed to be dead. Richard looked at his hand, then at her. Something shifted in his expression. The pretense fell away, replaced by cold calculation. You should leave. I don't think so. We have a lot to talk about. We have nothing to talk about. How about Emily? Victoria's voice hardened. Our daughter, the one you've never met, the one you abandoned before she was even born. For a moment, just a flash, something like guilt crossed Richard's face. Then it was gone. What do you want, Victoria? Money? Is that why you're here? I want the truth. She stepped closer. I want you to look me in the eye and tell me why. Why you left. Why you let me think you were dead. Why you let Emily grow up without a father when you were alive the whole time. Richard set down the glass shard carefully. When he spoke again, his voice was different, colder. You really want the truth? Yes. Fine. He poured himself another drink, drained half of it in one swallow. You were never enough, Victoria. Our life together. It was suffocating. Boring. You wanted the suburban dream, the minivan, the PTA meetings. That wasn't me. It was never me. The words hit like slaps, but Victoria kept her face neutral. So you decided to commit fraud instead. I decided to take what I deserved, Richard corrected. I worked my ass off at that company, made them millions. And what did I get? A middle management salary and a pat on the back. Meanwhile, the executives were pulling in 7 figures. He laughed bitterly. I just leveled the playing field. You stole $47 million. I took what I earned. He finished his drink. And when I realized they were getting close to finding out, I made a choice. I could go to prison, lose everything, spend the rest of my life in a cell, or I could start over. New identity, new life, no baggage. No baggage, Victoria repeated slowly. That's what we were to you, me and Emily, baggage. Richard met her eyes. Yes, the single word hung in the air between them. And Sophia? Victoria asked. She wasn't baggage. His expression flickered. How do you? I know everything, Richard. About Sophia Laurent. About how she helped you set up the shell companies. About how you were having an affair with her for 2 years before you died. Victoria pulled out her phone, showed him the photo of Richard, Sophia, and Thomas on the yacht. I know about your son. Richard stared at the photo. Where did you get that? I hired a private investigator, ex-FBI. Very thorough. Victoria put the phone away. You left me for her. You already had another family waiting. Emily wasn't even part of the equation. Was she? Sophia understood me, Richard said, defensive now. She wanted the same things I wanted. Success, power, a life that mattered, and murdering an innocent man. Victoria's voice shook with anger. Now, did that matter? Did Michael Johnson's life matter when you burned him alive so you could disappear? Richard's face went pale. I don't know what you're talking about. Michael Johnson, homeless man, disappeared the same night as your accident. The body in your car wasn't yours, Richard. It was his. You got him drunk, put your wallet in his pocket, staged the whole thing. Victoria stepped closer. Doctor, Blake confessed. He told us everything. How you threatened him, paid him off, made him falsify the death certificate. Blake's lying. He has recordings, photographs, evidence you gave him. Victoria watched Richard's composure crack. It's over. The DA has everything. They're building a case for fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to commit murder. Richard backed away from her. You can't prove any of this. Actually, I can, because you've been confessing for the past 5 minutes. Victoria touched the necklace at her throat. This isn't jewelry, Richard. It's a wire. The FBI is listening to every word you say. His face drained of color. You're bluffing. Am I? Victoria tilted her head. You want to bet your freedom on that. Richard's eyes darted to the door. Calculating, Victoria could see him weighing his options. Run, attack, deny everything. Don't even think about it, she said quietly. There are agents outside. You're not getting out of here. You bitch, Richard spat. You stupid, pathetic. The door burst open. 3 FBI agents in tactical gear flooded in, weapons drawn. Richard Coleman, hands where we can see them. Richard raised his hands slowly, his face twisted with rage. This isn't over, Victoria. You have no idea what you've... Richard Coleman, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit murder. One of the agents grabbed Richard's wrist, yanking it behind his back. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed in the suite. You have the right to remain silent. Victoria turned away. She didn't need to hear the rest, didn't need to see him dragged out like the criminal he was. She walked to the windows and stared out at the Miami skyline, the bay glittering with city lights. Behind her, Richard was shouting threats, making demands for lawyers, claiming this was all a mistake. But Victoria wasn't listening anymore. Daniel appeared at her side, gently removing the wire from around her neck. You okay? Yeah. And surprisingly, she meant it. I'm okay. You did great. We got everything on tape. Walsh is thrilled. Victoria watched as they led Richard out of the suite in handcuffs, still protesting his innocence. He called Emily baggage. He's a sociopath, Daniel said. Don't let him get in your head. I won't. Victoria took a deep breath. He's not worth it. He never was. The arraignment happened faster than Victoria expected. 3 days after Richard's arrest, she sat in the back of a Manhattan courtroom watching her dead husband, very much alive, stand before a judge in an orange jumpsuit. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. Without the expensive suits and the Cartier sunglasses and the arrogance, he was just a middle-aged man who'd made catastrophically bad choices. The people charged the defendant with conspiracy to commit fraud in the first degree, identity theft, conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, and money laundering, the prosecutor announced. Jennifer Walsh stood at the table, her expression triumphant. Given the severity of these crimes and the defendant's history of fleeing justice, the people request remand without bail. Richard's lawyer, some slick defense attorney who'd probably cost a fortune, argued for bail. Your Honor, my client is a businessman with no prior criminal record. Your client faked his own death and fled the country. The judge interrupted dryly. Bail denied. Trial date set for 60 days from today. The gavel came down. Richard turned, scanning the courtroom, and his eyes locked on Victoria's. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Then the bailiffs led him away. Victoria felt nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication, just emptiness. You okay? Daniel asked beside her. I don't know what I am. The media descended like vultures. Executive fakes death, abandons pregnant wife, screamed the headlines. Victoria's face was plastered across every news site. Every tabloid. Reporters camped outside her apartment building, shoving microphones in her face whenever she left. Mrs. Coleman, how does it feel knowing your husband is alive? Did you suspect anything before he died? What will you tell your daughter? Victoria kept her head down and said nothing. She'd given one statement through Walsh's office. Brief, factual, revealing nothing personal. The rest was noise. Emily, thank God, was still with Margaret in Brooklyn, shielded from the worst of it. But Victoria knew she couldn't protect her forever. Eventually, Emily would ask questions. Eventually, Victoria would have to explain that the father she'd never known wasn't a hero who died in a tragic accident. He was a criminal who chose to abandon them. How do you tell a 7-year-old something like that? The trial began in early March. Victoria attended every day, sitting in the same back row seat, watching as the prosecution systematically dismantled Richard's life. Dr. Blake testified first, his voice shaking as he described how Richard had threatened his daughter, how he'd helped stage the death, how he'd lived with the guilt for 7 years. I knew it was wrong, Blake said, tears streaming down his face. But I was terrified, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. The defense tried to paint Blake as an unreliable witness, a man who'd fabricated the story to save his own skin. But the evidence was overwhelming. The recordings, the fake dental records, the photographs, all of it pointed to one inescapable conclusion. Richard Coleman had orchestrated his own death. Financial experts testified about the embezzlement, tracing the money through shell companies and offshore accounts. $47 million, stolen over 3 years, hidden so well that Coleman Construction's auditors hadn't caught it until it was too late. A forensic anthropologist explained how the body in the burned car couldn't have been Richard's. Wrong bone structure, wrong height, inconsistencies the original medical examiner had ignored or overlooked. And then there was Michael Johnson's sister, a woman in her 50s who'd spent 7 years wondering what happened to her brother. He had problems, she testified, her voice breaking. Addiction, mental illness. But he was still my brother. He was still a person, and someone murdered him like he was nothing. Victoria watched Richard throughout the testimony. He sat stone-faced at the defense table, occasionally whispering to his lawyer, but never showing emotion, never showing remorse. On the 10th day of trial, the prosecution played the recording from the hotel suite. Victoria's voice filled the courtroom, calm and steady, asking why. And then Richard's response, cold and brutal. You were never enough, Victoria. You were a placeholder, a practice wife. Jurors shifted uncomfortably. Some looked at Richard with disgust. Others looked at Victoria with pity. She hated both reactions equally. When the recording ended, Walsh called Victoria to the stand. She'd been dreading this, talking about her marriage, her grief. The 7 years she'd spent believing a lie. All of it felt like stripping naked in front of strangers. But Walsh had prepared her well. "Mrs. Coleman, can you describe your relationship with the defendant?" Victoria took a breath. "I loved him. I thought we had a good marriage. We were expecting our first child together, and then he died. Or I thought he died. And my whole world fell apart. Did you have any indication that he was unhappy? That he was planning to leave?" "No. He seemed excited about the baby, about our future. If he was planning to abandon us, he hid it well." "What was it like?" "Discovering he was alive." Victoria's hands clenched in her lap. "It was like being hit by a truck. Everything I'd believed, everything I'd mourned, it was all a lie. He let me grieve. He let me raise our daughter alone. He let me struggle financially while he was living in luxury in the Caribbean." Her voice cracked slightly. "He watched me suffer and didn't care." The defense attorney cross-examined her, trying to suggest she'd been a neglectful wife, that Richard had felt trapped, that the marriage had been failing long before his disappearance. Victoria held her ground. "My marriage might not have been perfect," she said firmly, "but I didn't steal $47 million. I didn't murder an innocent man. I didn't abandon my child. That was all him." The prosecution rested after 2 weeks. The defense tried to argue that Richard had been coerced by Sophia Laurent, that he'd been manipulated, that he deserved leniency, but it fell flat. The evidence was too strong, the crimes too calculated. On March 28th, the jury deliberated for 6 hours before returning a verdict. Guilty on all counts. Richard showed emotion then. Finally, his face crumpled. His lawyer put a hand on his shoulder, but Richard shook it off. The judge scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later. Victoria left the courthouse through a side exit, avoiding the reporters. Daniel met her on the street with coffee. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Tired." She took the coffee gratefully. "Really, really tired. It's almost over, sentencing. Then you can move on." Victoria looked up at the gray New York sky. "Can I move on? Or is this going to follow me forever?" "It'll follow you," Daniel said honestly. "But it doesn't have to define you." Sentencing day arrived on a rainy April morning. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, court watchers, people who'd been following the case. Victoria sat between Daniel and her mother, Emily safely at home with a babysitter. The judge looked down at Richard with cold eyes. "Mr. Coleman, you have been found guilty of some of the most egregious crimes I've seen in my 30 years on the bench. You stole millions, destroyed lives, and murdered an innocent man to cover your tracks. You showed no remorse, no conscience, no humanity." Richard stood, his jaw tight, saying nothing. "On the charge of conspiracy to commit fraud, I sentence you to 15 years. On identity theft, 5 years. On conspiracy to commit murder, 20 years. On obstruction of justice, 3 years. On money laundering, 7 years. These sentences will run consecutively, for a total of 50 years in federal prison. You will be eligible for parole after serving a minimum of 35 years. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Richard swayed slightly, gripping the table. "Additionally," the judge continued, "all assets connected to the defendant will be seized and liquidated. Restitution will be paid to Coleman Construction Group, to the family of Michael Johnson, and to Mrs. Victoria Hayes for the financial hardship caused by the defendant's actions." The gavel came down. Richard was led away, his face blank with shock. Victoria watched him go. 50 years. He'd be in his 90s before he saw freedom again. Longer than the marriage they'd shared. Longer than Emily's entire childhood. It was over. Outside, reporters shouted questions, but Victoria kept walking. Daniel had a car waiting. They drove through the rain-slicked streets of Manhattan in silence. Finally, Victoria spoke. "I need to go home. I need to see Emily." "I'll take you there," Daniel said. Victoria stared out the window at the city blurring past. Somewhere in a federal holding cell, Richard was beginning to understand the consequences of his choices. And somewhere in Brooklyn, Emily was drawing pictures, doing homework, living her beautiful, innocent life. Victoria had spent 7 years mourning. But now, finally, she could start living again. 3 months after the sentencing, Victoria stood in the driveway of a modest house in Long Island. Watching the moving truck pull away, the house wasn't huge. 3 bedrooms, a small yard, quiet neighborhood. but it was theirs, really theirs, paid for with the restitution money from Richard's seized assets. "Mommy, can I pick which room is mine?" Emily tugged on her hand, bouncing with excitement. "The one at the end of the hall," Victoria said, smiling. "The one with the window seat." Emily squealed and ran inside. Margaret followed more slowly, carrying a box labeled "Kitchen, Fragile." "You sure about this?" her mother asked. "Leaving the city?" "I'm sure." Victoria looked up at the house. White siding, blue shutters, a front porch perfect for morning coffee. "Emily needs a yard to play in. I need space to breathe the city. It has too many memories." Margaret set down the box and hugged her. "I'm proud of you, honey. You know that, right?" Victoria hugged her back, fighting tears. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." "Yes, you could have, but I'm glad you didn't have to." The first few weeks were an adjustment. Victoria had transferred to a new airline hub. Working day shifts now instead of red eyes, she wanted to be home when Emily got off the school bus, wanted to help with homework, wanted to be present in a way she hadn't been able to before. Money wasn't as tight anymore. The court had awarded her $500,000 in restitution, enough to buy the house. Set up Emily's college fund properly, and have a cushion for emergencies. It didn't erase the 7 years of struggle, but it helped. Emily adjusted quickly, making friends at her new school, joining soccer, bringing home drawings to hang on the refrigerator. She seemed lighter somehow, like the move had given her permission to just be a kid. But Victoria knew the conversation was coming, the one she'd been dreading since the trial ended. It came on a Tuesday evening. Emily was working on a school project, a family tree assignment that had been sitting on the kitchen table for 3 days. "Mommy," Emily's voice was small. "Can you help me?" Victoria sat down beside her. The paper showed a tree with branches. Emily had filled in "me" at the bottom, Mommy and Grandma Margaret on the branches above, but there was a blank space where Daddy should be. "I don't know what to put here," Emily said, not looking at Victoria. "Mrs. Patterson said we have to include both parents, but I don't know anything about him." Victoria's chest tightened. She'd known this moment would come eventually, had rehearsed different versions of this conversation with her therapist, Dr. Chen, a kind woman who specialized in helping people process trauma. "What do you want to know?" Victoria asked gently. Emily was quiet for a moment. "Did he love me?" The question broke Victoria's heart. "He never met you, baby. You were born after he left. But did he love me before? When I was in your tummy? How did you answer that? How did you tell a 7-year-old that her father had abandoned her before she was born? That he'd chosen money and another family over her?" Victoria took a breath, channeling everything Dr. Chen had taught her about age-appropriate truth. "Your father made some very bad choices, Emily. He hurt a lot of people, including us, and he chose to leave before you were born. Why? I don't know. Sometimes people make choices that don't make sense. That hurt the people who love them." Emily stared at the blank space on her family tree. "Is he dead? Like you told me before?" Victoria had agonized over this with Dr. Chen. Emily was too young for the full truth. The fraud, the murder, the trial. But she deserved honesty. "No, baby, he's not dead. He's alive. But he's in prison. He did bad things and he's being punished for them." Emily processed this for a long moment. "So he's a bad guy. He made bad choices." Victoria corrected carefully. "That's not the same thing as being a bad person. But the things he did were very wrong. Do I have to see him?" "No, never. Not unless you want to when you're older." Emily nodded slowly. Then, in a move that surprised Victoria completely, she picked up her pencil and wrote in the blank space, "Dad, in prison." Beneath it, she drew another branch and wrote, "Uncle Daniel." Victoria's throat closed up. Daniel had been around a lot in the past few months, helping with the move, teaching Emily to ride her bike without training wheels, showing up for soccer games. He'd become part of their life without any of them really planning it. "Is that okay?" Emily asked, worried. "I know he's not really my uncle, but it's perfect," Victoria said, pulling her into a hug. "It's absolutely perfect." The healing wasn't linear. Some days were good. Victoria woke up feeling hopeful, made breakfast with Emily, went to work without the weight of grief crushing her chest. Other days were hard. She'd see a man who looked like Richard from behind, or hear a song they'd danced to at their wedding, and the anger would come flooding back. Dr. Chen helped her process it. "You're not grieving Richard anymore," she explained during one session. "You're grieving the life you thought you had, the marriage you believed in. That's different, but it's still a loss." "I feel stupid," Victoria admitted, "for not seeing the signs, for being so naive. Richard was a master manipulator. He fooled his company, the police, a medical examiner. You're not stupid for trusting your husband, but I should have known." "Should have how?" Dr. Chen interrupted gently. "With what evidence? The occasional late night at work, the business trips. Those are normal things in a marriage. You couldn't have known he was embezzling millions and planning to fake his death." Victoria knew Dr. Chen was right intellectually, but emotionally, the guilt lingered. Margaret noticed. "You're doing it again," she said one evening while they were making dinner at Victoria's house. Emily was outside drawing with sidewalk chalk. "Doing what? Blaming yourself for his choices?" Margaret chopped vegetables with precise, angry movements. "That man was a liar and a thief. Nothing you did or didn't do caused that. It was all him." "I know that." "Then stop punishing yourself." Victoria set down her knife. How do I just stop?" Margaret turned to face her. "The same way you did everything else. One day at a time, one choice at a time. You choose to focus on Emily. You choose to build this new life. You choose to be happy despite what he did. What if I don't know how to be happy?" "Then you learn," Margaret said firmly. "You deserve happiness." "Victoria, don't let him take that from you too." Daniel stopped by the following Saturday to help install a swing set in the backyard. Emily supervised by giving detailed instructions while eating popsicles. "This is nice," Daniel said as they worked. "The house, the neighborhood, good choice. Thanks for helping with everything," Victoria said. "The move, the research for the trial, just everything. I don't know what I would have done without you." Daniel smiled. "You would have figured it out. You're stronger than you think." "I'm not feeling very strong lately." "Strength isn't about never breaking," Daniel said, tightening a bolt. "It's about breaking and still getting back up. You've done that more times than most people do in a lifetime." They worked in comfortable silence for a while. Finally, Daniel spoke again. "You ever think about dating, moving on?" Victoria laughed. "God, no. I can barely handle being a single mom with a full-time job. I don't have energy for romance." "Fair enough, but someday, when you're ready, there are good men out there. Not everyone is like Richard." "I know." Victoria handed him a wrench. "But right now, I'm focusing on me and Emily. Everything else can wait." Smart. By late afternoon, the swing set was complete. Emily tested it immediately, pumping her legs and laughing as she went higher and higher. Victoria watched her daughter soar against the blue sky, hair flying, face bright with joy. This was what mattered. Not Richard, not the past, not the 7 years of lies. Just this, Emily, laughing and free. Margaret came outside with lemonade. Daniel pulled up a lawn chair, and Victoria sat with them in the warm sun, feeling something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the fragile, desperate peace she'd clung to after Richard's death. Real peace. The kind built on truth and honesty and hard-won self-knowledge. She'd lost 7 years to a lie, but she still had the rest of her life to live, and she was going to make it count. 6 months after the sentencing, Victoria woke to sunlight streaming through the bedroom windows of her Long Island home. For the first time in years, maybe ever, she didn't immediately think about Richard. Didn't calculate bills or worry about making rent or replay the night she got the call about his death. She just breathed. Through the wall, she could hear Emily singing off-key in her room, probably getting dressed for the Saturday morning soccer game. Margaret was already in the kitchen. The smell of coffee and cinnamon rolls wafted upstairs. This was home. This was peace. This was the life she'd built from the ashes of Richard's betrayal. The soccer field was crowded with parents in folding chairs, kids in bright jerseys warming up, coaches barking encouragement. Victoria found a spot on the sideline next to Daniel, who'd become a fixture at these games. "Morning," he said, handing her coffee from the concession stand. "Black, right? You're a lifesaver." She took it gratefully. They watched Emily run drills with her team. 8-year-olds with more enthusiasm than coordination, tripping over the ball and laughing. Emily had grown in the past 6 months, gotten taller and more confident. She still asked about her father sometimes, but less often. The therapy helped. "She's doing great," Daniel observed. "You both are. Most days," Victoria agreed. "Some days are still hard. That's normal. Healing isn't linear." Victoria sipped her coffee, watching Emily high-five a teammate. "I got a letter yesterday, from Richard." Daniel's expression darkened. "What did it say?" "I don't know. I didn't open it." She'd held the envelope for a long time, feeling its weight, seeing the prison return address. Then she'd put it in a drawer. "I'm not ready. Maybe I'll never be ready." "That's your choice to make, no one else's." The whistle blew. The game started. Emily played midfielder, running back and forth with determined intensity. She wasn't the best player on the team, but she tried hard and had fun. That was enough. At halftime, Emily ran over, face flushed and happy. "Did you see? I almost scored." "Almost counts," Victoria said, pulling her in for a quick hug. "I'm proud of you. Can we get pizza after, please?" "With extra cheese," Victoria promised. Emily grinned and ran back to her team. Margaret appeared with water bottles. "That child has more energy than should be legal." "She gets it from you," Victoria teased. "Please, at my age, I'm lucky if I can stay awake past 8 p.m. Margaret sat down in Daniel's vacated chair. He'd gone to get snacks. "How are you really doing, honey?" "Better." Victoria meant it. "I'm sleeping through the night now. The nightmares stopped, and work is good. I'm up for a promotion to senior flight attendant." "That's wonderful." "It is." Victoria watched Emily defend against an opponent. "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop. You know, for something else to go wrong. But maybe it's okay to just be happy." "It's more than okay." Margaret squeezed her hand. "You've earned it." After the game, which Emily's team won 3-2, they went to the local pizza place, a family-owned spot with checkered tablecloths and pictures of Italy on the walls. Emily demolished 2 slices and half of Margaret's garlic bread while recounting every play of the game in exhaustive detail. Daniel listened patiently, asking questions, treating Emily's analysis with the seriousness of a professional sports commentator. Victoria watched them and felt something warm in her chest. Not romantic love, at least not yet, but something close. Possibility, maybe. "Uncle Daniel, can you come to my birthday party next month?" Emily asked through a mouthful of pizza. "Wouldn't miss it," Daniel promised. "We're gonna have a bouncy house and face painting and—" "Don't spoil all the surprises," Victoria interrupted, laughing. Emily grinned, cheese on her chin. "It's gonna be the best party ever." That evening, after Margaret went home and Emily was asleep, Victoria sat on the back porch with a glass of wine, listening to crickets and watching fireflies blink in the yard. The swing set Daniel had helped install swayed slightly in the breeze. She thought about Richard sometimes, not with the raw grief of before, but with a kind of distant curiosity. What was prison like for him? Did he regret his choices? Did he ever think about Emily? Probably not. Sociopaths didn't tend toward introspection. Sophia Laurent had been deported back to France after serving 18 months for her role in the fraud. Thomas, their son, was living with Sophia's parents in Lyon. Victoria had looked him up once. A normal-looking kid with Richard's eyes and Sophia's dark hair. Emily's half-brother, though they'd probably never meet. She didn't hate the boy. How could she? He was as much a victim of Richard's choices as Emily was. Dr. Blake had received immunity for his testimony and retired from the medical examiner's office. Last Victoria heard, he'd moved to Maine and was volunteering at a free clinic, trying to make amends for his role in Michael Johnson's death. Michael Johnson, the homeless man whose life Richard had stolen. His sister had used the restitution money to start a foundation helping homeless veterans. Victoria had donated to it. Not much, but something. A small gesture that felt important. "Mom," Emily's voice came from the doorway. "I had a bad dream." Victoria set down her wine. "Come here, baby." Emily crawled into her lap. Too big for it, really, all long limbs and bony elbows. But Victoria held her anyway. What was the dream about? The bad man from the news? The one who hurt people? Victoria's heart squeezed. They'd tried to shield Emily from most of the media coverage, but some had slipped through. He can't hurt you. He's far away, locked up where he belongs. But what if he gets out? He won't. Not for a very, very long time. Victoria stroked Emily's hair. And even if he did, we're safe. Uncle Daniel made sure of that. Grandma's always here, and I will always, always protect you. Emily was quiet for a moment. Then, do you think he thinks about me? The bad man? Victoria chose her words carefully. I don't know, honey, but it doesn't matter. Because the people who do think about you, me, Grandma, Uncle Daniel, your friends at school, we're the ones who matter. Family isn't about DNA. It's about who shows up. Like you, Emily said. Like all of us. They sat together in the warm night air, Emily's breathing evening out as she relaxed. After a while, Victoria carried her back to bed, tucked her in, kissed her forehead. I love you, Mommy, Emily mumbled, already half asleep. I love you too, baby. More than anything in the world. Back on the porch. Victoria picked up her wine but didn't drink it. Instead, she pulled out her phone and opened the photo album. 7 years of pictures. Emily as a newborn, taking first steps, first day of kindergarten, gap-toothed smile, soccer uniform, birthday parties. A whole life documented. Richard wasn't in any of them. Not really. He'd never been there. But Victoria had. Margaret had. Daniel had. Claire and the other friends who'd supported her through the worst of it. They were Emily's family. They were what mattered. Victoria scrolled back further, past Emily's baby pictures, until she found her wedding photo. Her and Richard, young and hopeful, believing in forever. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she deleted it. Not out of anger, not even out of pain. Just because it was time. Time to stop carrying the weight of his betrayal. Time to stop defining herself as the woman Richard had abandoned. Time to just be Victoria. Mom. Friend. Daughter. Survivor. She looked up at the stars, scattered across the Long Island sky like diamonds. Somewhere in a federal prison, Richard was probably lying on a narrow bunk, counting down the decades until parole. Sophia was rebuilding her life in France. Dr. Blake was trying to atone for his sins. But Victoria was here, in this house, with her daughter asleep upstairs and her mother a phone call away, and a future that was finally, truly hers. She raised her wine glass to the empty sky. Here's to new beginnings, she said quietly. The fireflies blinked their agreement. Inside, the house was warm and safe. Emily's drawings covered the refrigerator. Margaret's knitting basket sat by the couch. Daniel's baseball cap hung by the door from last weekend's game. This was her life now. Not perfect. Not what she'd imagined at 25, but real. Honest. Built on truth instead of lies. Victoria finished her wine, locked the doors, and went upstairs. In Emily's room, she paused to watch her daughter sleep. Peaceful, safe, loved. Your father doesn't know what he's missing, Victoria whispered, but that's his loss. Not ours. She went to her own room, climbed into bed, and for the first time in 7 years, fell asleep, without the ghost of Richard Coleman haunting her dreams. She was free, finally, completely free.